There are 6 plants sitting in almost every kitchen in America right now. You have bought them hundreds of times. You have prepared them thousands of different ways. And yet, what most people actually know about these plants would barely fill a napkin. The real stories behind the banana, corn, wheat, the tomato, the potato, and the simple head of lettuce are stranger, deeper, and far more useful than anything printed on a nutrition label. Some of these secrets were known for centuries and then quietly lost. Others were deliberately stripped away when the food industry decided efficiency mattered more than knowledge. Either way, what follows is everything nobody told you about the plants you eat the most. Let's start with the one most Americans reach for without even thinking: the banana. Every single standard banana you have ever eaten is a genetic clone. Not similar, not a close relative, an exact copy. The Cavendish banana, which is the variety that fills every grocery store shelf in the country, cannot reproduce on its own. It has no seeds. Every new banana plant is grown from a cutting of an existing one, which means every banana in every store in every state shares the same DNA. This is not a small detail. It is the central vulnerability of the entire global banana supply. And we already know what happens when a cloned crop meets the wrong disease, because it happened before. The banana your grandparents ate was not the Cavendish. It was called the Gros Michel, and by most accounts, it tasted better, sweeter, creamier. But in the 1950s, a soil fungus called Panama disease swept through plantations across Central America and nearly wiped the Gros Michel off the earth. The industry switched to the Cavendish because it was resistant to that particular strain. But now a new strain, called Tropical Race 4, is spreading across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and the Cavendish has no defense against it. The banana as we know it is living on borrowed time. But here is something almost nobody talks about. The ripeness of a banana completely changes what it does inside your body. A green banana is loaded with resistant starch, a type of carbohydrate that passes through the stomach undigested and feeds beneficial bacteria in the gut. It behaves almost like a fiber. It slows blood sugar response, it improves insulin sensitivity. The riper a banana gets, the more that resistant starch converts into simple sugar. So the spotted, soft banana on your counter and the firm green one sitting next to it are practically 2 different foods from a metabolic standpoint. Your grandmother may not have known the science behind it, but if she ever told you to eat a banana before it got too ripe, she was more right than she probably realized. And one more thing. The banana plant is not a tree. It has no wood, no bark, no trunk in the botanical sense. It is the largest herbaceous plant on Earth. What looks like a trunk is actually a tightly packed column of leaf sheaths. The entire plant is technically a giant herb. You have been eating fruit from a herb your whole life. Now take corn. The story of corn is arguably the greatest act of genetic engineering in human history, and it was done entirely by hand, thousands of years before anyone had a laboratory. Corn does not exist in the wild. There is no wild corn. The ancestor of corn is a scraggly grass called teosinte, and it looks almost nothing like what we eat today. Its kernels are tiny, hard, and scattered. Over thousands of years, indigenous peoples in what is now Mexico selectively bred teosinte into maize through an extraordinarily patient process of choosing the best ears, saving the seeds, and replanting. They turned an almost unusable wild grass into one of the most calorie-dense and versatile crops on the planet. That is not farming. That is civilization engineering. But the real secret of corn is something the original cultivators understood and Europe never bothered to learn. When Mesoamerican peoples prepared corn, they soaked it in an alkaline solution, usually water mixed with wood ash or lime. This process is called nixtamalization, and it does something critical. It unlocks niacin, which is vitamin B3, that is otherwise trapped inside the corn kernel and unavailable to the human body. When Spanish colonizers brought corn back to Europe and Africa, they brought the seed but not the preparation method. The result was widespread pellagra, a devastating niacin deficiency that caused skin lesions, diarrhea, dementia, and death. Entire populations suffered for centuries from a nutritional disaster that could have been avoided if they had simply asked how the crop was supposed to be eaten. And then there is the corn silk. Those fine threads that most people rip off and throw away have been used in traditional medicine across multiple cultures for centuries. Corn silk tea was a common remedy for urinary tract issues and mild inflammation long before modern pharmaceuticals existed. Every strand of silk is connected to a single kernel on the cob. If the silk does not receive pollen, that kernel does not develop. The part most people discard is the part that made the ear of corn possible. Wheat built the modern world. That is not an exaggeration. The cultivation of wheat in the Fertile Crescent roughly 10,000 years ago is what allowed humans to stop wandering and start staying in one place. Stored grain meant surplus. Surplus meant cities. Cities meant specialization, trade, governance, and everything that followed. But the wheat that enabled all of that was a fundamentally different plant than what fills a bag of all-purpose flour today. Ancient varieties like einkorn and emmer had higher protein content, more minerals, and a simpler gluten structure that was easier for the human gut to process. Modern wheat has been bred for maximum yield and industrial baking performance. The result is a grain that produces more bushels per acre, but delivers less of what the human body originally adapted to digest. When wheat is milled into white flour, the bran and the germ are removed. The bran is the fiber-rich outer layer. The germ is the nutrient-dense core that contains B vitamins, vitamin E, healthy fats, and essential minerals. What remains is the starchy endosperm, which is the least nutritious part of the kernel. Most of the food value of wheat is literally stripped out and sold separately or discarded before the flour ever reaches your kitchen. And here is the quiet irony. Sourdough bread, which uses a long fermentation process with wild yeast and natural bacteria, partially breaks down gluten and phytic acid, making the nutrients in wheat more accessible and the bread easier to digest. The oldest method of making bread turns out to be the most effective one. The modern shortcut of fast-rise commercial yeast skips all of that. Now consider the tomato. When the Spanish brought tomatoes back from the Andes to Europe in the 16th century, most Europeans refused to eat them for nearly 200 years. They called them poison apples, and people who ate them did sometimes get sick or worse, but the tomato was not the problem. The plates were. Wealthy Europeans ate from pewter dishes, which contained high levels of lead. The acid in the tomato leached lead from the plate into the food. The tomato was blamed for the poisoning that the dishware caused. It took generations before anyone figured this out, and by then the tomato had already earned a reputation it did not deserve. Here is what makes the tomato genuinely unusual. It is one of the very few foods that becomes more nutritious when you cook it. Lycopene, the compound that gives tomatoes their red color, is a powerful antioxidant linked to reduced risk of heart disease and certain cancers. But raw tomatoes lock most of their lycopene inside cell walls that the human gut struggles to break down. Cooking ruptures those walls. Adding a small amount of fat, like olive oil, increases absorption even further. A simple pot of tomato sauce delivers more bioavailable lycopene than a fresh tomato ever could. Then there is the potato. If you had to survive on a single crop, the potato would be your best option. A diet of potatoes supplemented with a small amount of butter or milk can sustain a human being for a remarkably long time, because the potato contains nearly every essential nutrient, including vitamin C, potassium, B6, iron, magnesium, and even a meaningful amount of protein. The Inca knew this thousands of years ago. They developed a freeze-drying technique called chuño, where potatoes were left out in the freezing Andean nights, stomped to squeeze out moisture, and sun-dried. The result was a lightweight, shelf-stable food that could last for years. This was advanced food preservation technology thousands of years before the modern freeze-drying process was patented. When the potato arrived in Europe, it was rejected almost everywhere. It belonged to the nightshade family, which includes several toxic plants, and Europeans were deeply suspicious of it. Frederick the Great of Prussia reportedly used reverse psychology to get his people to adopt it. He planted royal potato fields and posted guards around them, making the crop appear valuable and exclusive. Peasants began stealing and growing potatoes on their own, which was allegedly the entire point. Finally, salad, or more specifically, lettuce. Most Americans think of lettuce as a nutrition afterthought, a crunchy vehicle for dressing. But the ancient Egyptians saw it very differently. They cultivated lettuce as a sacred plant. It was associated with Min, the god of fertility, and it was featured in religious ceremonies. But the Egyptians were not growing it for salads. They were growing it for the milky white sap that oozes from the stem when it is cut. That sap is called lactucarium, and for centuries it was used as a mild sedative and pain reliever. It was sometimes called lettuce opium. It was recognized in pharmacopoeias across Europe well into the 19th century. The plant that most people now consider the least interesting thing on their plate was once treated as medicine. The reason iceberg lettuce dominates American grocery stores has nothing to do with nutrition or taste. Iceberg became the standard because it ships well. It is dense, compact, and resistant to bruising during long truck hauls across the country. Darker varieties like romaine, red leaf, and butterhead contain dramatically more vitamin A, vitamin K, folate, and antioxidants, but they are more fragile. The logistics of industrial food distribution chose your lettuce for you, and the choice was made based on what survives a 3-day truck ride, not what survives best inside your body. 6 plants, all of them ordinary, all of them hiding in plain sight, every one of them carrying a history, a function, or a vulnerability that most people were never taught. The food system does not reward curiosity. It rewards speed, consistency, and shelf life. But the more you learn about what you are actually eating, the more you realize that the old ways of growing, preparing, and understanding food were not primitive. They were precise. And most of what was not lost by accident. It was lost because someone decided it was not efficient enough to keep.